This podcast is brought to you by Gundealio, gundealio.com, and the smartphone app Gundealio. Download the smartphone app, free for your phone. You'll get notifications about deals on guns, ammo, and then also podcast stuff, video stuff. So a lot of good content there, but also deals to be had. And also we can send you messages when you walk into a gun store, give you a heads up about new products or deals going on. And then gundealio.com, it's kind of the sister site for it. And another place where you can find ammo in stock and deals galore. So check that out.
Welcome in to another episode of Gun Talk Hunt. I am your host, Kevin Jarnagin, also go by KJ, among other things amongst my friends, but no better friend than this might be our first repeat guest, I think. But we've got Mr. Thomas Allen on once again because I like him so dang much. This is typically where you jump in and you say, "Oh, hey, thanks for having me."
Well, you took me back because you were talking about those other nicknames, and I had a bunch of them rolling through my mind, and I was trying to pick one out that was family friendly, but I can't.
Oh, well, thanks,
Kevin. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, and this was all put up pretty quick, so I caught him kind of off guard. But it's a subject that he knows a lot about, and I kind of want to jump in because we're nearing the end of a bunch of big game seasons, primarily because we're kind of in those throes of we're transitioning in between, the season's over, but there's work to be done. But I want to get into trail cameras and set up what to look for in trail cameras and where you're going to set those late season and why you need to continue running those.
Well, you're right about one thing. I don't ever stop thinking about this. There's not a bad time to talk about it. And yeah, if you ask my wife the amount of money I spend on batteries throughout the year and SD cards, she would roll her eyes and have some inappropriate words to say. But the reality is it's a lifestyle, and if you want to be successful, you have to stay in touch with the deer you're hunting. And right. Granted, in our case this year, Kevin, you and I got together and hunted Oklahoma on your place, and I had no history there. And that's really a situation where you find it best to not run trail cameras for a lot of reasons. But I think in most cases, as the season winds down, while you're still thinking about it, you want to know who survived. You want to know what next year's options are going to look like. And frankly, you get to this point in the year, the deer get very grouped up. They're focused on food, and it's a great time to determine your overall herd health, and I like to call it inventory, where you see who survived and what you might be looking at next year. So it really starts with, I think, identifying the hot food source and taking it from there. And really depending on where you live, north to south, the climate that you're hunting or running your cameras in is going to determine where you set these cameras, how often you visit the cameras, and then what you're trying to take from those. And I think this is a great time to focus on herd health, right? Let's start there.
I agree.
The first thing you want to determine or be able to understand is if the deer you were after survived, and if there are any injuries that it's sustained, can you determine that from the pictures? But you want to know how many deer you have left over. And where do they all focus when the weather gets cold or when they're in survival mode in Iowa, Minnesota, the Midwest, the Great Plains, corn and beans or a food plot? That's really where I'm going to start looking at the quality of the deer, their body shape. One of the things, Kevin, we've noticed over the years is as I would say a 3 and 4 year old buck is going to run himself ragged to the point where his ribs are showing, his spine is showing. That's the time frame of their lives when they're breeding the most. As they get older, they tend to focus more on the quality of the encounter.
Yes.
And they don't run themselves as ragged. So if you see a really run down deer during the rut, it's a good time to probably age that deer. If he's got a decent rack, a deer you'd have a hard time passing, but he's kind of on that edge, I would guess you could say he's probably 3 or 4 years old.
And that's
largely due to the rut.
That's absolutely, they're strapping on that feed bag. And I mean, there's no better time. Late season, you and I love the late season to hunt it because we know where to concentrate. If you find that hot food source, that's where they're going to be. And the same thing applies to trail cameras. But you brought up a good point. You brought earlier, it doesn't happen very often, but you bring up a good point. So you stated that, I don't have much use for cameras out in Oklahoma, just the way, one, I hunt, the terrain, and it's really, it's a little bit more difficult to kind of strategize around their travel patterns and stuff like that. But it still goes back to food source. This year in Oklahoma, we did not have that prominent food source that we could continue going back to. And so it has been years since I ran cameras. And that was a strategy point for me. But Thomas runs, conservatively, I would say this man runs 40 cameras. That's me being very conservative with my guess. 40 cameras a year. Is that,
yeah.
I mean, fair?
That's actually the number. I have my SD cards numbered up to 39, and there's a couple that are not labeled. So you're really close. Now, let's talk about how accessible these have to be. This is one of the biggest mistakes I've seen hunters make, and I know this because I used to make the mistake. Late season, you've got to be careful where they're at.
Yep. 100%, man.
Well, but here's the point, and I don't care what brand you run. Some are better. I have many different brands, but when it gets cold, I'm in Minnesota right now. I grew up in Iowa. I've hunted all the Midwestern states. I've hunted Alabama. There's cold weather everywhere you go. And batteries just don't last as long. And so the last thing you want to do is have a camera you're depending on that's deep into your property that's going to be chewing through batteries. Yep. So you need to be considerate of the deer you're hunting. You don't want to put them in too far, or if it's the kind of camera that, all right, you just want to run it for a few days, you're going to go in there and hunt, pull the card, swap the batteries, make sure you're taking batteries with you when you go in.
Yes,
every time. You don't want to be penetrating those destination food sources on a regular basis. So keep your late season cameras on the fringe and make sure that you're able to get to them as often as makes sense. But just like anything, Kevin, the more times you visit, their core, their security cover, their destination food sources, that's when you're going to be pushing deer out. So think about that.
And here's the thing, and another good man. He's full of good points today, people. I'm telling you, if you're not listening to this right now, you are crazy, and especially if you're thinking about running trail cameras late season. But it's how many times you're going to frequent that, because a lot of times those bucks that leave their core area, they're going to return and they're going to find that hot food source. And if you are going in there really often because you just can't wait to see what's on that SD card, guess what? You are being patterned.
That's right.
That deer is patterning you. So when it hears that familiar hum of your truck pulling up and that door shutting and, we know someone's coming, so let's leave. And this, I'm guilty of this. Like, this is a big time. This is where I screwed up when I was setting out trail cameras, because I couldn't wait. It's like opening a Christmas present when you open that SD card, because you don't know
every time.
Every time.
Well, here's something to consider though with that. Now, in your neck of the woods, probably where you hunt, in Alabama, where I lived for 5 years, those are not primarily agricultural areas. There's ag work in Oklahoma for sure, but those areas aren't being accessed by the farmers on a regular basis. In Iowa, in Wisconsin, in the Dakotas, all of these areas where there might be cattle or livestock, the farmers are going out into those areas regular enough where you can access with a truck. But the further north you go, the more snow you have to deal with, the better chance you're going to get of getting stuck, and that's a big mess. I've found one and a half solutions, and the second half of that solution goes to the first one. Cell cameras are critical in those parts of the world. If you want to get way back into your core, your destination areas, the best spots you've got for late season, put up a cell camera.
Yeah.
But the part half to that is invest in your batteries or find a better power source. Now, when it's cold, I don't care if you buy the Extreme Energizer or the $13 AA Duracell. I don't care. They're all going to die in about 4 days.
Yeah.
There is some options out there. A lot of trail camera companies offer adapters for you to implement some type of external power source. Maybe that's a solar panel. Yeah. Yep. Or there's even hookups nowadays, Kevin, where you can include like a Dakota Lithium the duck decoy size battery, the robo
Right.
ducks.
That is massive.
Yeah, but see, that'll run that thing for a long time,
Right.
and it's not going to be as long as it normally would in the cold. But think about if you've got 5 really hot destination food sources. You've got a winter wheat field, you've got standing beans, you've got standing corn, whatever it is, and you're going to get 1 or 2 hunts out of that a year because if you go in, you're going to kill. I call those kill plots. Like, granted, you hunt the fringes, you might kill something, but you have some spots are just that good. You're going to kill when you get there. You don't want to mess those up while you're planning to hunt there by going and checking the cameras. So take a cell camera in there, set it up once, get good batteries, and by that you got to do the research. But I suggest an external power source with the lithium, and let the cameras come to your phone.
Yep. I completely agree. And that's one of those things where you start patterning those deer and it becomes a kill plot because like for good history that deer will be there, because now you're getting these alerts.
And they're real sensitive right now.
Is that cheating? No, let's come on. Let's walk through this.
There have been people that have said that, and I have a hard time with it because even in the world of fishing, which is where I make my living, you have people say, well, this electronics makes it too easy. It's too hard. Well, the rebuttal that I've been given, and I believe this firmly, you still have to get out there. You still have to make good decisions to get to that point, and you have to make the right decisions to pull the trigger or make the cast to the right spot when that moment arrives. So all of that information you're gathering, it's more refined. It takes a more experienced outdoorsman or angler to gather that information. But when the moment of truth comes, Kevin, you know me. You know me really well. I don't execute a lot of times as well as I do.
Well, because you've built yourself up to that point. Like, you've got yourself so far that now, like, you realize, like, oh crap, this is up to me. Like, this is a little frustrating. And we had a strong bout of that last year in Iowa, or 2 years ago in Iowa now, where we were very, like, we sent out cell cameras to watch these areas, and we get all these information back, and there's massive deer out there, and we have all this history with all these deer, and we go out and we, of course, completely blow it because that's how we do things, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, listen, if you're going to endure those elements, and the deer don't read the script, they're not guaranteed to show up. They could be walking behind your trail camera. They could be walking in front of it 10 days in a row and decide to go a different way when you get there. So it's a matter of being there. Yeah. There's nothing that you can substitute for time on the water or time in the woods for learning experience and making the right decisions. And that information helps you make better decisions, but there's no guarantee.
No.
My dad, I love him, bless his heart. He won't listen to this podcast, so I know I can kind of get on him a little bit.
All right,
has a great little deer property. Great little deer property in his backyard. Every year he gets a booner to walk through, but he gets the pictures of it, then starts to hunt. And then he'll I'm not seeing them. Well, the deal is the cameras only give you so much information. And if you're relying too much on your cameras, you're going to make decisions that are going to cost you. So everything we're talking about now, Kevin, needs to be taken with a grain of salt. All this information is important. And it's the more information you can put things in your favor, you're going to be more successful down the road, but you still got to be there and you still got to battle the elements like you and I did in Iowa 2 years ago, where it was brutal cold some days. And frankly, at that point, you deserve a freebie.
So you'd like to have a freebie, but they're not always guaranteed.
They're not. And as we know, our good friend, his son shot a giant deer just last night. And you know where he was sitting when he shot that, Kevin?
Where?
Right where you missed.
Which one? Which time? I missed twice.
The last night. The very last night.
Oh, you got to be kidding.
No. And
okay.
we're a little, we're being a little cryptic here, but the point is, you got to go.
Oh, I'll tell you. I'll tell folks exactly what happened. I sat in a great little spot behind a cedar. All these deer are filtering out to feed in the evening, and our mutual friend who has been on this show, Mr. Jeremy King, said, hey, they're going to come out right here. And he was right, because he has history with that spot, and he doesn't gain history by just sitting on the fringes watching. He has cameras set up. He's not as diligent about checking them as much as we tend to be, but he knew throughout history that this was going to happen. And I missed, but his son, absolute killer. Emmett, congratulations on your deer. The deer
Giant.
scores right around 163 inches and is an 8-point.
Yes. Well, you made a point here. Let's circle back on this. So Jeremy, as we know, he doesn't run the cameras like I do per se, largely because where he hunts, he's able to watch these areas, observe these areas, long-range scouting. He puts a lot of time behind his glass.
He does.
And that's something that I think when you pair that with your trail cameras, especially in the late season, there is no substitute to putting eyes on a big deer late season before you hunt them. Trail camera or from the window of your truck. So those two things together,
yes.
Guess what, Kevin? That's a time investment. So you made the joke a little bit ago about it getting too easy. Is it fair? It's fair because you really got to invest the time. You got to know where to put the cameras.
Yep.
You got to be wise about when you check them. And then you got to understand what you're getting back, and that information is only a part of the puzzle.
It is. But you do. I mean, so watching a field from the fringes, I think, is almost as important, but it's nice when you can't go, but he does. He's a game warden. He puts in time, and he's on the road all the time. So he, if he's driving by a field and goes, oh, what is that out in the field? He has time to where he might be able to pull over and glass it a little bit and say, okay, that's a deer that I might like to move in on, or, I'm going to keep that one quiet. But he's able to spend that time to see this. But for the guys out there like you and I, who are largely, honestly, we're traveling hunters. I mean, we have to make up our time by using trail cameras, and the cellular cameras honestly have been a absolute miracle worker for the traveling hunters.
That's absolutely true, and I think it's important for turkey hunting. But let me give you one more example of the value of the camera and the information you can gather from them. I live on 7 acres. I don't have much, but I've got just enough that there are a few deer that feel comfortable back here. And this year, my son really wanted to shoot one out of the timber behind our house. And I thought, that's a great idea, but we need to be careful about how often we go back there to check the camera and replace batteries, this and that. Right. So we put the cell camera 100 yards behind my house. Well, these deer are largely nocturnal, especially late season here in Minnesota. They get a lot of gun pressure, and traditionally they just go dark. They move around at night. Well, we had a big cold front coming in. I could see it a week in advance.
Okay.
And I started to see a pattern in the time that the deer were actually crossing the trail that the camera was looking down. And Kevin, they started getting minutes earlier in the evening. So I could see a pattern in a 4 or 5 day stretch. It was 5:13 p.m., 5:12 p.m., 5:09 p.m., and end of shooting time here at that time frame, I believe, was like 5:07. So, and it progressively got earlier. And then I was like, this is a perfect storm. He is going to be able to get out, hunt some brutal cold right around the time the deer are showing up within minutes of the end of shooting time. And I'm telling you, that was the ticket. Now, we know Tommy. Yep. We know that he has a tendency to get pretty excited. We talked about him on the show the last time I was
yes, we did.
When he shot that big buck in Oklahoma, it was an amazing experience, but he was by himself in the tree stand. It was 4 degrees.
That's dedication for a kid his age. I mean, come on.
He's committed.
Yep.
But here's the thing. That night, I told Catherine, I said, those deer are going to show up, and they're going to be right in his lap. He's never killed one with his bow. He really wants a bow deer. Yep. And I'm telling you, like they read the script, they walked in with 5 minutes to go of legal shooting light, and at 10 yards, Tommy missed. And it was a pretty big buck to boot. But here's the point. You have to be able to analyze every little bit of information that you get, and understanding deer movement patterns and habits. Watch from a long distance. Be smart about where you're putting your cameras. And it can become a deadly combination, but you still got to get out there and brave the elements.
I think analyzing what you're seeing is just as important as, oh my gosh, look at the rack on this one. I think that's more important than identifying, the buck that's on your hit list or however you want to say it. But I think guys need to look at this and go, okay, what has changed in this time frame? And I think that's just such an overlooked piece of the puzzle. But so Just another little tip for you guys, and Thomas touched on a little bit on placement of cameras. But late season, if you want to conserve some batteries, you're going to have to tweak some of your settings in your camera. One good, just an idea, if it has a time-lapse function, set it just to run every 30 seconds or so, at the end of the day, last 2 hours of shooting light, and set it up higher in the tree. Don't set it low, just set it up higher in the tree so you can capture the entire field, so you can analyze movement that way, and make sure you get a camera that actually has some good resolution to it, right?
Yeah, let me add something to that. That just sparked an idea because I've been dealing with this in my backyard. If you're dealing with a lot of critters, if you're hunting a place in Alabama, you can put bait out. As the weather gets colder, a lot of times you're going to have raccoons and squirrels and possums and armadillos and whatever show up at those bait piles. That's going to suck a lot of pictures out of your camera life. So it might be a good idea to move the cameras off of bait and focus on travel corridors. And
Absolutely.
In Alabama, that could be a trail that enters a food plot, or maybe, again, depending on regulations in your state, a mineral lick. Yeah. Because they may not stop and spend time at the mineral site a lot, but they're still probably using that area as a travel path. So a lot of times I just look for those heavy traffic areas or areas that are open enough where deer are moving through, like a food plot, Kevin, a standing bean field. But also, this is the biggest killer. It drives me crazy. And this is because I've made this mistake. If you have brush in front of your trail camera, clear it out.
Clear everything. If you think that branch has any chance of getting blown into your shot or the IR camera's view, get rid of it. Because
they say a lot of these cameras are heat activated, but that's not entirely the case. Because if you got a big stick blown in front of that sensor, it's going to go off. Or anything really. I've had a single piece of brome grass just pop up in the wind and get 300 photos of it. So those are great ways to save battery life, but also to reduce stress when you're looking at pictures.
Exactly, because you're like, I know I see antlers. I know that's an antler. Like, you can talk yourself into this, and that's why I think if you start looking at cameras with better resolution, so you can kind of zoom in and grow that picture so you can actually see really what's going on in there. I think that's going to eliminate, like you said, a lot of frustration and a lot of heartache, honestly, because you're like, no, that's not the deer I need to pursue. And then you're like, oh, what's that way back there,
Well, and one last thing here. I keep getting last ideas. During the year, yes, I run a tremendous amount of cameras when I have access to all my properties. A lot of the places I hunt, though, I'm not able to hunt during the regular gun season, or I might not be able to hunt past a certain day, or whatever the case may be. Get your best cameras out of your group and put those out. Deploy the ones that work the best, because you do want to gather as much information as short a time as possible. And if let's say you've got 5 Reconyx cameras and a bunch of Wild Game Innovations cameras, those Reconyx are going to last longer, better on battery life. They're just a better camera, but you're going to spend more money on them. So, and it's like a good set of binoculars, good glass. The more money you spend, you're going to get a better product when it comes to trail cameras. That's my experience.
That's fair.
And I think that's a time where you got to focus on getting your most valuable players put in the field, and the ones that work the best, operate the best, have fewer malfunctions, and that's just going to reduce stress, because you do cut back on the number of cameras you need, or the number of spots you're watching in the late season, because they congregate.
Absolutely, and honestly, don't be scared to move your cameras if you're not seeing what you need, because the worst thing you could do is leave one of your best cameras out there, taking pictures of the same 5 or 6 does and maybe a little 2.5-year-old buck that you're not really interested in. Don't be scared to move it. Maybe that's not the food destination that you thought it was. Maybe you need to locate somewhere else. Like you say, those travel corridors, man, a lot of times bucks, man, they're just cruising the edges. They'll cruise the edge. They'll enter the field last light, and then that's all you'll see.
But that information right there, Kevin, is why a trail camera is important wherever you're able to put it to get that information. Because if it does come down to minutes, it did for Emmett 2 nights ago.
That's right.
It did for you and I in Iowa. You need to know when to be alert. And guess what? If you're hunting the Midwest or upper Midwest during January, the weather can be brutal. And the most important thing you got to do is mentally stay in the game. Think, all right, I got a half hour left. I'm freezing, but I got to hold it together because that shot of a lifetime might just show up when you got 2 and 3 minutes left of legal shooting light.
I can't agree anymore. Like it's trail cameras can be frustrating. They really can be. If you're not seeing what you think you should, but move them around, find those hot spots. Mess with your settings, and don't be scared to take some of these trail cameras home, set them up in your yard and test them. Like see what you should be getting. As far as battery life and everything, I think you're right. You've got to watch those. You've got to stay on top of it. Give us an idea of SD cards.
Oh yeah.
Let's talk about SD cards and what guys should be looking for. And this will kind of be our last little topic. And we could honestly, Thomas Allen and I could talk about trail cameras nonstop. But give us an idea of like what SD cards guys should be utilizing for their trail cameras.
That's interesting. I have tried different brands. I've tried different. I think there's powers or capabilities. Here's what I'll tell you. I know in my high definition video camera, I try to get like an Extreme Pro Plus, Super Duper Star, the best card ever. And you don't necessarily need that with a trail camera. In fact, I would just go to Amazon and say you need an 8 gigabyte card and buy the 10 pack. And that's generally what I will do for stocking up my cameras. And so SD cards can be fickle. And here's where you're going to run into troubles. If you're swapping cameras and cards, granted, every single camera operates a little bit differently, but if you get in the same brand, even those cameras are going to function slightly different internally, or the cards are going to be read different. So I've done for many, many years of running numbers of cameras, I get 2 specific SD cards per camera, and they only go in that camera.
Yep.
And I format them. So as soon as I'm done dumping my cards, I create a routine. I take all of the pictures, all of the files, 100%. So the very first file inside that card goes in the trash. I empty the trash, eject the card, put it back in the camera when I get to the woods, and I format it. Now, there have been some circumstances where I just pull the card out, put it in, turn the camera on, and leave, and I've not had a problem with that.
Right. Yeah.
But I think the key there is keeping the cards unique to the cameras, because there is some weird, and I'm sure somebody that builds cameras and cards is listening to this thinking this guy's full of crap. But the reality is I have never had a card go bad that was related to where it was going. Now, I've had cards that I've used for years, Kevin, that they just go bad, then that happens. I would suggest a minimum of 8 gigabytes. Most cameras will tolerate a card up to 32 gigs, and that's an important thing to think about as to where that camera is located. If you're going to put that camera way back in there and you're using the cell camera feature, when you fill up that card, it's done taking pictures, even if it's a cell camera. So if you got too little of storage and you're not going to make it in there for a week and it already fills up, then you've wasted a week of recent information.
You're done. Like it sets you back, really. And you don't want that.
Yeah, and I have friends that just carry a Ziploc bag full of cards, and they just reach in and grab one and plug it in. And, if that were me, it would not work because that's my luck.
Yeah.
But I certainly suggest keeping them separate. Buy decent cards, brand name. ScanDisk is one that I've bought a lot of.
Yep.
And I'm not paid by ScanDisk to say that. I don't have a ScanDisk sponsorship. Maybe I will someday.
That would be nice for all of us.
It wouldn't. Yeah, man. I need 40 more cameras.
Yeah.
So, think about that. Take care of them. Keep them in an organized little book. Keep them from getting wet. Don't run them through the wash. That's not good on cards.
I've done that a time or two. I know I've done that multiple times. And
they seem to work sometimes after that too.
Sometimes, but you're rolling the dice there. And I'm not very good in Vegas, so I'm not going to trust that.
No.
Well,
that's a fact.
Thomas, I can't tell you how much I enjoy talking about this with you, and you are, I would say that the reason I talked to Thomas about this is because he's one of the top authorities, I believe, that I would go to if I had questions on where to set stuff and where to set trail cameras. He'd probably be the one I go to because honestly, he runs way more cameras than I do, and he knows way more about it.
It's really a bit of an OCD problem. I like
is.
having the information, but you said it earlier, and this is the bottom line: is I love watching deer, and I love the feeling of Christmas morning once
Yep.
a week when I've got 27 cards to go through. I just think that's a lot of fun.
And you're like, here we go.
Deer fascinate me, and that's
Yeah.
the thing. From north to south, east to west, all the places I've hunted, a whitetail's still a whitetail. We talked about this the last time you and I spoke on the
Yep.
show. A whitetail's a whitetail anywhere you go. The terrain makes it different, and that creates different habits within the species. But that little area in itself, I find incredibly fascinating.
Oh, absolutely.
And then there's something about an old buck, whether he's got a giant 163-inch 8-point frame or whether he scores 127 inches. It doesn't matter. The brain of that deer is the same, and their capability to disappear and frustrate you to the nth degree is just awesome. And that's what I can't get enough of.
It's so much fun, man. Well, thank you guys for listening to Gun Talk Hunt this week. I hope you enjoy your weekend. Have fun, and always be safe.